LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the December 23rd edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I've picked out the weekend's 14 best, most newsworthy clips for what should be a really educational, informative, fair use, media criticism, and political analysis show for you all tonight. There's no Saturday Night Live, no Bill Maher, nothing in terms of actual political comedy, so I'll go to the real news for sources of political comedy. Actually, I'm going to show you a 2-minute clip from AM Joy, Joy Reid, starting off with Donald Trump's presidency supposedly being a joke presidency. That's actually from Ann Coulter, and I'll talk about how Donald Trump is kind of answering the question, what would happen if Fox News ran America? That was one of the things that happened with the government shutdown and the border wall this week, and that'll be the political, I don't know, is that comedy? It's kind of dark comedy. And then you'll see Joy Reid makes a joke about Donald Trump's wall, and a reference as I'm kind of a Lord of the Rings fan. I actually have right behind me over my shoulder here, you can see here's a souvenir my daughter brought me back from Hobbiton in New Zealand, because I'm a Lord of the Rings fan. And you'll see there's a Lord of the Rings joke, but then I'll go to my main topic, which is the Trump tailspin. Not a really funny prospect. Things are going from bad to worse. There's the shutdown. There's the Syria controversy with the resignation of James Mattis, the defense secretary. There's the drop in the stock market, and then, of course, ongoing investigations, including the Mueller investigation and the Trump Foundation investigation. That'll be the main topic from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News. Those are the big five corporate outlets, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. Down in the video description, there's a link to my... Oh, I dropped it. To my clip list here. You can follow along my notes of my 14 clips. Also, there's links to the sources of all the clips I'm showing you. And as I promised, I'm going to start with sort of political comedy from Joy Reid this morning, talking about the border wall and the way the right-wing media put pressure on Trump and got him to do a government shutdown to make one last fight for his border wall. And it includes the Lord of the Rings reference I promised, which I will discuss with you after we watch that first clip tonight together over here.
It'll just have been a joke presidency that scammed the American people, enraged, amused the populace for a while, but he'll have no legacy whatsoever.
The president has gotten word to me that he is either getting funding for the border or he's shutting the whole thing down.
I think that not funding the wall is going to go down as one of the worst things to have happened to this administration. Forget Mueller. The wall has to be built.
All righty then, welcome back to AM Joy. How many broken promises does it take to lose one's base? Well, Donald Trump, for one, has managed to break a lot. He never repealed Obamacare, never managed to lock her up, or remove Syrian refugees from American soil, or balance the federal budget. But it isn't until now, as the precious, his beautiful southern border wall, hangs over the fires of Mount Doom. It's a Lord of the Rings reference. Google it. That his staunchest media allies are vowing to turn their backs on him if they don't get that wall. We're talking Fox News pundits and right-wing talking heads, the ones who helped propel Trump to the White House, and who wield more power than an entire row of electrified steel slats. Like in Trump We Trust author Ann Coulter, for instance, who penned the ultimate Trump regrets piece, calling the president gutless and a sociopath, and another word I probably shouldn't say on TV because it's Christmas. Steve Doocy on the Fox Curvy couch piled on, saying that Trump will look like a loser if there isn't a shutdown to make the American people pay for the wall that Trump said Mexico would pay for. And let's not forget Rush Limbaugh, the golden microphone, who told his radio audience that Trump personally promised him he'd shut down the government over the wall. Trump and his party went on to dutifully and very obediently shut down the government, and we're now in day 2 of that, with no end in sight, which led occasional Trump critic, who votes with Trump 84% of the time, according to 538. Retiring Republican Senator Bob Corker to tell CNN, quote, "We have 2 talk radio hosts who influence the president. That's tyranny, isn't it?" Joining me now, Jason Johnson.
And I'll have a long clip later of Bob Corker talking to Jake Tapper on CNN State of the Union, and it's a pretty dark forecast for the next few months. He basically says the next few months are going to be kind of a turning point, and he thinks maybe Trump's not going to run for re-election because of them, and so that's kind of something to look forward to. That's if you're following along on my clip list, that is clip number 11. We just saw clip number 1. Oh, and by the way, after the 14 clips, I will have a bonus Dash and Sandy clip for the Dash and Sandy fans, so hang on for that at the end. But now I'm going to get to the actual news in between. One other thing, I did say I would talk about that Joy Reid clip, and I think that she was spot on in pointing out the way that the right-wing talk radio and Fox News has a way of controlling this president that's kind of disturbing. I've seen multiple pundits talk about how in like authoritarian countries, the tyrant, the dictator, Putin, Erdogan, whatever, they try to take control of the media, but in Soviet Russia, media takes control of you, or right-wing media, or it's like it's another Yakov Smirnoff joke like last week, where here, no, it's the media takes control of the dictator for some reason in the United States, or just Trump spends a lot of time watching all kinds of cable news, and especially Fox and Friends and Fox News, and they want that wall. And the other thing I wanted to mention about that last clip is that I read the Ann Coulter editorial, the Gutless President editorial, and you saw Joy Reid say that Coulter called Trump a sociopath and was an opportunist, but another word I won't say. Well, I actually went through the whole article so I could tell you what Joy Reid wouldn't say Ann Coulter called Donald Trump. It was giant douchebag. I don't know. You can let me know down in the comments section if you think that was something that Joy Reid should have been willing to say on the Sunday before Christmas, or whatever her excuse was for not saying that. I don't know. I actually am a fan of AM Joy. I didn't really like her response to that whole homophobic blog controversy. I don't think she was completely honest in her response to that, but I still watch it because, like, if I only watched perfect media personalities, I wouldn't have anyone to watch. So, speaking of people I like to watch who aren't perfect, but who I like, the next clip is the first news summary. Chuck Todd on NBC's Meet the Press. A lot of people attack Chuck Todd. I don't know why. I think he does a good job most of the time. Not all the time, because he's like Joy Reid. He's not perfect. And he certainly has I don't know if he has a liberal bias. I don't think the liberal bias, I don't really buy much in the media for most people. More Rachel Maddow or maybe Joy Reid has more of a liberal bias, but they're not Chuck Todd on Meet the Press, the longest running news program in television history, as Dennis Haysbert, is that the guy who was the president on the first season of 24? He's the guy who does the voiceover for Meet the Press, and he'll always say at the beginning, the longest running news program in television history. And so Chuck Todd, I don't think he has such a liberal bias, but he has more of a corporate bias. All of them have a corporate bias, but I think he had maybe the second best news summary, but definitely the longest news summary with the most details. 4 minutes, 2 seconds. And I'm going to compare it to the best one, I think, from ABC, because sometimes some of these scandals get lost from the week. The ABC news summary talks about the Trump Foundation scandal, which for any other president would have been a huge scandal. Doesn't even make it into the news summary from Chuck Todd, but all the major all the news outlets, including Fox News, had some version of Trump chaos, Trump crisis, Trump Christmas crisis, or I have Trump tailspin. You'll see that's in the word cloud. That's part of this news story from Chuck Todd from the beginning of Meet the Press this morning that I will discuss with you after we watch it together over here.
When much of Washington talked about a shutdown, which came at midnight on Friday, the word many mentioned around this city was actually meltdown. There were a lot of other words and phrases that emerged as the week came to an end amid serious questions about whether the Trump presidency has so lost its footing that it may not be able to fully recover. Mr. Trump likes to project an image of independence and strength, but the president's growing dependency on his base for political survival was exposed when he appeared ready to give up funding for his border wall, temporarily at least, in order to keep the government running. Mr. Trump's base revolted, with right-wing provocateur Ann Coulter writing a column entitled "Gutless President in a Wall-less Country." On the basis of his self-interest alone, Coulter wrote, he must know that if he doesn't build the wall, he has zero chance of being reelected and a 100% chance of being utterly humiliated. President Trump unfollowed Coulter on Twitter, but he followed her advice, saying in effect, no wall, no deal. At the same time, his defense secretary and his point man on ISIS quit over the president's abrupt decision to withdraw from Syria based on a phone call with the Turkish president. And all of this happened as stocks suffered their worst December since 1931. Many have noted that despite Mr. Trump's many self-inflicted wounds, his presidency has benefited from not having to face a financial or international crisis. But perhaps now we need to face this uncomfortable question. What if the president is the crisis?
The shutdown hopefully will not last long.
President Trump ended a week of chaos as cracks emerged in his fragile Republican coalition.
It's really the Democrat shutdown.
But just days ago, the president claimed credit.
I will take the mantle. I will be the one to shut it down.
And some Republicans are making it clear they hold him responsible for the third government shutdown this year after he rejected a deal negotiated earlier this week.
I'll just remind the president, the Republicans are in charge. And so the shutdown is on us if we can't figure this out.
On Friday, the president yielded to pressure from conservative supporters.
The wall has to be built, and this was a scandal that it hasn't been built.
President has gotten word to me that he is either getting funding for the border or he's shutting the whole thing down.
Retiring Republican Senator Bob Corker responded, "Do we succumb to tyranny of talk radio show hosts? The reason we're here, we have a couple of talk radio hosts that get the president spun up." And on Capitol Hill, reliable Republican allies were shaken by the abrupt resignation of Defense Secretary Jim Mattis, who broke with the president on his decision to pull U.S. troops out of Syria, writing pointedly, "You have the right to have a Secretary of Defense whose views are better aligned with yours."
I think he's sort of a Democrat, if you want to know the truth.
Senate Republicans responded uneasily. Leader Mitch McConnell, who rarely breaks with the president publicly, called himself particularly distressed that he's resigning due to sharp differences with the president.
I'm very concerned about Secretary Mattis's decision to leave.
Ambassadors of our allies have been reaching out to senators to basically say what the hell is going on.
The president also alienated Republican hawks on the Syria decision itself, which he abruptly announced on Twitter on Wednesday.
We won, and that's the way we want it, and that's the way they want it.
This isn't akin to surrendering.
Syria's a total quagmire, but it's possible to make it even worse.
Russian President Putin hailed the move. Reliable Trump ally Fox News denounced it.
He's giving Russia a big win. Vladimir Putin praised him. He also is doing exactly what he criticized President Obama for doing. He said President Obama is the founder of ISIS. He just refounded ISIS.
And joining me now is Republican Senator Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania.
And no clips of Pat Toomey. I was a little more selective in my clips this week, but I have, I think, about 36 minutes worth of clips, which means that the show should be about an hour and 15 minutes long. If you're watching this as a recorded show, you already know how long it is, but for my live viewers, that should be going for about an hour and 15, hour and 20 minutes, based on the length of the clips. And the one thing I want to say about that NBC Meet the Press news summary, that the thing they didn't say, they covered a lot of great stuff in there. They gave context to the shutdown, how President Trump said that he would own the shutdown and then started blaming the Democrats, which you won't see that on Fox News. I have some criticisms of Fox News. That's the fourth news summary I'm going to show you. But one criticism I have of that Meet the Press news summary is NBC has been reporting for the last couple days that the Mueller report is finishing up and that it's going to probably be released as early as February 15th, like February or March, which kind of jibes maybe with what Bob Corker is talking about in that clip 11, the really dark clip 11 that I was mentioning earlier, although I don't know, that's speculation on my part. But anyway, you didn't hear on Meet the Press any mention of the fact that NBC News is reporting for days now that the Mueller report is finishing up and will be out in as early as mid-February. I don't know why, and that was on AM Joy this morning. Why is it that, I don't know, is it like the sources are good enough for MSNBC but not good enough for NBC's Meet the Press, the longest running show in television history, as 24 President Dennis Haysbert will tell you. But anyway, I did say that there was one thing in this ABC News summary that I thought was better than the NBC News summary, even though it's about a minute shorter. It does include mention of the Trump Foundation scandal, which, like I said, big scandal, was only mentioned briefly here on ABC, nowhere else. In any other presidency, the fact that there's a huge civil suit against the Trump Foundation in New York, and that there's already a settlement where it's being dissolved, and the Attorney General in New York is trying to get all the members of the Trump family banned for 10 years from serving on the boards of any 501c3 charities, which I actually serve on the board of a 501c4, and I'm a member of a 501c3. But anyway, I used to be on the board of a 501c3, the ACLU of Northern California Foundation. Anyway, but that's going off on a tangent. But at least I'm qualified. Unlike members of the Trump family, I will continue to be qualified to fulfill that job. And that is only mentioned in the ABC News summary that has a lot of the same information you saw from NBC, spun a little bit differently, but also in terms of crisis and bad things happening. People seem to be very worried in the corporate media, as you'll see John Karl in as the host this week. And there's also a lot of focus on Syria. That's why I remember that, just because I mentioned John Karl as the guest host, where the permanent co-host Martha Raddatz has all these military connections, and I don't know if that contributed to this story, but it definitely has a lot of the thoughts of the military about how Donald Trump is being erratic in the last part of this 3-minute news summary from ABC this morning over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. We have witnessed an extraordinary level of chaos this week, even by the standards of the past 2 years. A sudden troop withdrawal, a stunning resignation, a breakdown in negotiations, a partial government shutdown, and a volatile stock market suffering its worst week since the Great Recession. Amidst it all, investigations seeming to close in. Investigations that have already hit the president's former campaign chairman, national security advisor, and personal lawyer. This week brought down the Trump Family Foundation. With Democrats just 11 days away from taking over the House, the president needs his party's backing now more than ever. But there are signs that Republican faith in Trump is beginning to waver.
Man, have I become the ultimate outsider, right?
Donald Trump campaigned on being a disruptor, proudly unpredictable, unapologetically playing by his own rules. But now, those very qualities are shaking the Republican Party.
Mr. President, can we ask about the shutdown?
We'll see what happens.
After the White House first signaled the president's support for a bipartisan bill to keep the government open, the president suddenly reversed course, rejecting the plan because it did not include money for his border wall.
We're going to have a shutdown. There's nothing we can do about that.
Dragging reluctant Republicans into a shutdown showdown.
I haven't seen shutdowns ever work.
I think a government shutdown is not a good option.
But it was the surprise resignation of Defense Secretary Jim Mattis over the president's abrupt decision to withdraw from Syria that prompted the loudest criticism from fellow Republicans, including a rare rebuke from Senate Leader Mitch McConnell. I'm particularly distressed that Mattis is resigning due to sharp differences with the president on these and other key aspects of America's global leadership. A group of senators, including 4 Republicans, urged the president to reconsider the Syria withdrawal, calling it a costly mistake that, quote, not only threatens the safety and security of the United States, but also emboldens ISIS, Bashar al-Assad, Iran, and Russia. And after reports of the president's plan to also withdraw thousands of troops from Afghanistan, one of the president's staunchest allies in the Senate issued an ominous warning.
If we withdrew anytime soon, you'd be paving the way for a second 9/11.
All this played out against the backdrop of a rocky week on Wall Street. It was not only the stock market's worst week since the Great Recession, but also on track to be the worst December since 1931. And joining us now is Mick Mulvaney, the man just named acting White House.
And I will have multiple Mick Mulvaney clips, actually 3 Mick Mulvaney clips, one from Fox News Sunday in just a couple minutes, and then 2 near the end. If you're following along on my clip list, it's that was just clip number 3, and the Mick Mulvaney clips are clips 6, 12, and 13 of my 14 clips. Clip 14 is Adam Schiff talking about who he's going to, whether he will subpoena the Mueller report if the Trump administration tries to claim executive privilege. That'll be the final news clip at the end for those of you who want spoilers about what's coming up, or not really spoilers, but just that's what I'm planning to cover. But I do still have 2 more news summaries. The one thing I forgot to say about those last 2 news summaries is I noticed, remember last week I criticized Chuck Todd for not having a package, which is, you know, Chuck Todd usually does this live introduction and then goes to a pre-recorded video package that he narrates. And he did that this week. And then Jonathan Karl did the same thing. You don't see that so much on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. I actually kind of like that format where they have like a live introduction to give like the latest updates and then a pre-recorded video package. That's not what they did on CNN State of the Union, but Jake Tapper has his own little tradition where he says, what's the State of the Union this week? And it's chaotic. I thought it was going to be chaos, but it was based on the introduction. And like I said, all the introductions talked about chaos and crisis and tipping point. And you saw in the NBC Meet the Press word cloud, Tailspin was even in there. That's the title I decided to use because it means a mental or emotional breakdown if you look it up on Merriam-Webster, which I happened to do when I was choosing it for my title. And you'll see chaos is actually chaos and crisis, I think, were the words most used in the corporate news media. Oh, and even for the chaotic, even for the Trump administration, which I think even shows up in the Fox News summary, which I will show after I show this CNN State of the Union news summary from Jake Tapper this morning over here.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the state of our union is chaotic, with fears that it's all about to get much worse. If President Trump was looking for a dramatic season finale, he's got it. The government shutdown, top officials quitting in protest, a plummeting stock market, and there's still a week of 2018 to go. Saturday, President Trump announced that he and Melania will celebrate Christmas in Washington this year instead of at Mar-a-Lago. They will not be able to gaze upon the normally spectacularly adorned national Christmas tree, however. The government shutdown means it's lights out for the large evergreen near the White House, as the government seems almost sure to remain partially closed through the holiday. Congress will not resume official business until Thursday, with no deal in sight, leaving federal workers facing uncertainty over the holiday. Some 380,000 employees will stay home until the government reopens, while about 420,000 employees deemed essential will be forced to work without pay. A reminder, most federal employees do not live in the Washington, D.C. area. They live throughout the country. Saturday, lawmakers and members of the president's team appeared to remain at an impasse with no signs of a path forward. Republican Senator Leader Mitch McConnell announcing nothing will happen until the president and Democrats agree. President Trump is demanding $5 billion for his border wall, and Senate Democrats say they will not give him the votes for it. This, as the president seems to be even less restrained than normal after the sudden resignations of his defense secretary, Jim Mattis, and Brett McGurk, a top diplomatic official in the fight against ISIS, moves that have even some of the most loyal Republicans expressing misgivings and concern. I want to go straight to the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Senator...
and I will have a long clip of that Bob Corker interview. Like I said, that is the dark clip number 11 that I mentioned earlier in the show. But my other commentary on that Jake Tapper news summary is that it was kind of weird that it really focused on the Christmas consequences of the Trump shutdown, which, I don't know, Jake Tapper and Chuck Todd are both Jewish hosts, and I don't know why it is that Jake Tapper focused in on the Christmas consequences. I also promised that I would have one more news summary. This is from Fox News Sunday. I edited together two clips. This is the very beginning where Chris Wallace gives like the teaser summary that I don't usually show from, that's like before they actually come on and give their real news summary. But I wanted to include the very beginning from Fox News Sunday because he actually says the wheels are coming off the Trump administration, that's pretty harsh from Fox News. And you saw Trump was getting criticism from Fox News. He never says that anywhere later in the program. They never mention any of the investigations during Fox News Sunday. Not Mueller, not the Trump Foundation. Not anywhere in these news summaries I'm about to show you, both from Chris Wallace and then from Doug McElway. They also they talk about the Trump shutdown without ever showing Trump saying he was going to take responsibility for it, like they showed in the Meet the Press news summary. And the one person they show in the Doug McElway report reacting negatively to the Syria withdrawal is Nancy Pelosi, which is like Fox News code for people who are, radical, whose opinions we shouldn't care about. I don't know, but they've actually been criticizing Trump's Syria withdrawal pretty harshly on Fox News. So I don't know why they did that in this news summary, but I will talk about that with you a little more after we watch that final news summary together over here.
I'm Chris Wallace. A government shutdown, the stock market's in free fall, and the defense secretary quits over a sudden shift in policy. Are the wheels coming off the Trump presidency?
There are chaotic weeks, and then there's this week.
From the shutdown showdown.
It's really the Democrat shutdown, because we've done our thing.
You're not getting the wall today, next week, or on January 3rd.
To the worst week in the markets in 10 years.
What in the world is going on with stocks? Once pristine and going up, up, up and away, they are sliding away.
To controversial moves in the Middle East.
It is in our national security interest not to withdraw at this time. This isn't akin to surrendering.
That lead to a stunning resignation.
I am shaken by the resignation of General Mattis for what it means to our country, for the message it sends to our troops.
We'll discuss the current state of the Trump presidency. And hello again from Fox News in Washington. We are into day 2 of a partial government shutdown with no end in sight. But that's just part of a turbulent week in Washington, even by Trump standards. The shutdown's main sticking point, funding for President Trump's border wall. The financial markets rattled by uncertainty over the shutdown, trade tensions with China, and rising interest rates. And then there's the fallout from Mr. Trump's decision to pull troops out of Syria and Afghanistan that led Defense Secretary James Mattis to resign. In a moment, we'll speak with the president's new chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney. But first, let's get the latest from Doug McElway here in Washington. Doug.
Good morning, Chris. This morning, the Capitol is quiet and mostly empty after members scurried home late yesterday when it became clear there was no prospect for a deal before Christmas.
Late Saturday, leaders of both chambers decided to adjourn until Thursday. The day had begun with only faint hope of finding common ground on a deal to fund 9 remaining federal departments and a border wall. Hopes were further lifted when the White House announced a luncheon with members. But the list of invitees showed only Republicans, most of them immigration hardliners.
The president is prepared for a very long government shutdown, albeit a partial shutdown.
That while Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer was signaling his disdain for any bill that contained funding for a border wall.
The Senate's not interested in swindling American taxpayers for an unnecessary, ineffective, and wasteful policy. What we do support, Democrats and Republicans, is real, effective border security. but not a wall.
Meanwhile, more Pentagon departures are expected following Defense Secretary Mattis and Special Envoy Brett McGurk. And rattled by the stock market's precipitous dive, the president is said to be infuriated over the Fed's decision to raise interest rates, even asking aides if he can take the historically unprecedented step of firing Fed Chief Jerome Powell. As members of Congress rushed home for the holidays, President Trump tweeted, "I will not be going to Florida because of the shutdown, staying in the White House. MAGA."
Yet one of the attendees at yesterday's White House luncheon, Senator Richard Shelby of Alabama, described the president's mood as exuberant. Chris?
My favorite part of that clip is the narration where Doug McElway says, MAGA. I don't know, that seemed like odd to me. You can let me know anything down in the comment section. And I think I pretty much pre-criticized that clip before I showed it as to all the deficiencies in the reporting. Chris Wallace also had an interview with Mick Mulvaney, the incoming acting chief of staff to Donald Trump, which will be his third job in the Trump administration. He's director of the Office of Management and Budget, which is also important given that with the government shutdown, that's also part of his job. And like I said, I have a couple more clips of Mick Mulvaney from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, interviewed by Jonathan Karl, the guest host. That's clips 12 and 13 later. And Chris Wallace, to his credit, asked him some of these same things that I happened to watch This Week with George Stephanopoulos first, and so I took more Mick Mulvaney clips from that show. But these next several clips are about the reaction to the Syria troop withdrawal and the withdrawal of possibly half the troops from Afghanistan. I think they're 14,000, and Trump is saying he's going to withdraw 7,000 and maybe all of the troops. And it's kind of like a big gift to Vladimir Putin and Bashar al-Assad and Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran and of course, Erdogan in Turkey, and it's the kind of thing you would think you would negotiate, and it's kind of a weird thing for certain liberals like myself to criticize, who have been highly critical of any sorts of interventions in the Middle East, the length of the troop deployment in Afghanistan, the incursion into Syria, the war in Iraq, and so it's hard to kind of be a liberal saying, withdraw troops from Syria. I'm outraged when I never really wanted to put troops in Syria, and I'm going to show several clips that sort of show the gamut of how you can oppose what Trump did and be worried about the resignation of Defense Secretary James Mattis while still not being an interventionist. And I'm going to start with Chris Wallace talking to Mick Mulvaney. And one of the things he brings up here is how James Mattis was the first defense secretary in U.S. history to resign in protest over a policy of the president he served. And you'll see Mick Mulvaney says, that's not true. What about Chuck Hagel? And I actually looked it up after this, and Chuck Hagel was encouraged to resign by Obama. It was not a resignation in protest. And one thing I wanted to point out is I showed 4 news summaries. CBS's Face the Nation didn't really do a news summary, but in their teaser summary right at the beginning of the program, Margaret Brennan narrated some facts, and one of the things she said in that summary was that James Mattis was the first defense secretary in U.S. history to resign in protest over a policy of the president. And Mick Mulvaney totally dodges that and says, well, when Chris Wallace, to his credit, I just criticized Fox News Sunday earlier for being biased, but at least he has some cross-examination of Mick Mulvaney here. He doesn't cross-examine him really on the Chuck Hagel resignation question, but does cross-examine him on why it is that the defense secretary resigned, which he's saying that Donald Trump doesn't understand who our allies are, who we should respect, and who our enemies are, who we should be wary of and clear-eyed about. And you'll see Mick Mulvaney totally dodges that question, which I will discuss with you after we watch that back and forth between Chris Wallace and the incoming acting chief of staff, who is also director of management and budget. Oh, and also the head of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which I didn't even talk about, and I won't talk about now. And I'll talk about this clip with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
And people here in Washington are so rattled this week is because the shutdown comes exactly the same time as the president made a dramatic decision on pulling troops out of Syria and drawing down troops in Afghanistan, which led to the resignation of Defense Secretary James Mattis. I want to put up the resignation letter from Mattis, in which he writes this: "My views on treating allies with respect and also being clear-eyed about both malign actors and strategic competitors are strongly held and informed by over 4 decades of immersion in these issues." So Secretary Mattis is saying that he quit because his views on treating allies with respect and being clear-eyed about our enemies do not align with President Trump.
I don't think it was a dramatic decision. Keep in mind, this has been something that the president has been working on since he got to office.
Wait 1 second. It's the first time a defense secretary has ever resigned over policy in the history of the country.
I don't believe that to be the case. I think Chuck Hagel resigned for the same reasons.
I don't believe that he did resign over a matter of policy.
I thought it was a policy over ISIS, as a matter of fact. But again, look, it leaked out this week. In fact, it leaked out apparently from the Defense Department. This is not something that was done sort of at the drop of a hat. The president's been working on this for 2 years. So it's unfortunate that it came out the way that it did, but this was not a snap decision. And it's not a surprise to anybody because it's exactly what the president said he was going to do. Now, as to Mr. Mattis's resignation, if a cabinet secretary simply has such a misalignment with the president's priorities that he cannot serve him, that is the right reason to leave. You've asked me.
I completely agree with you, but the point is he's saying the reason he left is because he believes that allies should be treated with respect and we ought to be clear-eyed about our enemies, and he clearly doesn't think that President Trump feels the same way.
I don't read a letter that way. Look, let's be honest with each other. I think the relationship between these two men had been fraying. I think the president no longer relied on Mattis to be able to deliver the president's vision. The president has to know, I don't have to agree with the president on everything he asks me to do. In fact, we're not going to. I think he hires people who disagree with him because he likes that different input, okay? But if I'm physically incapable, completely incapable of doing what he wants me to do just because I don't believe it, I cannot serve him well, and I need to leave, and I think that's what happened.
It's a very honorable thing. But let's look, because it wasn't just Mattis. I want to put up the U.S. and...
So, yeah, Chris Wallace, like I said before I showed the clip, he did a good job of pointing out what James Mattis said in his resignation letter, and he was highly critical of Trump, even though he couched it in language that made it one of the weirdest or most obvious news stories, if you understand like the denseness of Donald Trump, that I read recently. Was like, at first Donald Trump, he read the resignation letter from James Mattis and didn't understand that it was critical of Trump, and then it wasn't until he watched the news coverage that he realized that Trump was like giving him a total burn by saying, you know, I believe that we should be respectful of our allies and clear-eyed about who our enemies are, and I guess the president should find a defense secretary whose views are more like his and less like mine. Means that Trump is not clear-eyed about who our enemies are and respectful of our allies, and he's totally selling out the Kurds. That's one of the things that it's been like postponed according to Erdogan and Turkey, but the Kurds are going to get totally screwed by this Trump deal if it goes through, of withdrawing troops from Syria, even though I never really supported those 2,000 troops, which I will talk about a little more after I show some more clips. But I want to show a few Syria clips here. If you want to see like the real, like true believer, non-interventionist, some people say isolationist, and this one seems like pro-Russian. I don't know why Rand Paul is so pro-Russian. in his commentary, but this is Rand Paul, who was talking to Jake Tapper on CNN's State of the Union. This is 4 minutes, 19 seconds of him defending the idea that we should get out of Syria and give a big win to, like I said earlier, Turkey, Erdogan in Turkey, and Putin in Russia, and the Ayatollah in Iran, and even the leftover forces from ISIS. I mean, this is, even for a non-interventionist who likes the non-interventionism of Rand Paul, there are two big dodges in his answers to Jake Tapper here. And Jake Tapper doesn't really follow up very well, I don't think. The double dodge is, first, at one point Jake Tapper asks him, what about the Kurds? And he dodges that by giving some talking points about how the burden should be on the generals to tell us what they're going to do. And then also on the no consultation thing, he totally changes. He doesn't answer Jake Tapper's questions. So there's some really big dodges from Rand Paul that I'll discuss a little more with you after we watch that 4-minute, 19-second clip from CNN's State of the Union together over here.
Foreign policy. It's clear the president went against the advice of his defense secretary, his top official leading the fight against ISIS, Brett McGurk, and his national security advisor, John Bolton, when making the decision to withdraw troops from Syria. You obviously support this policy. Did you talk to him about this?
Yeah, I have, and I'm very proud of the president. This is exactly what he promised. And I think the people agree with him, actually. I think people believe that we've been at war too long and too many places, and that we do need to turn attention to problems we have at home here. Roads, bridges, schools. We have a lot of problems in our country, and I think people are tired of spending, we spent several $1 trillion on these wars everywhere, and I think the president promised that he'd be different. And it's really one of the reasons he won, because he actually attracts independents who aren't beholden to either party, who say, you know what, why don't we turn attention back to America?
After the president's surprise announcement, you applauded the decision, but it seems like one of the last straws for Defense Secretary Mattis before he resigned was that the Turkish defense minister publicly threatened to slaughter the U.S.'s Kurdish allies as soon as the United States withdrew. Does that not concern you at all, what the Turks might now do as soon as the U.S. is gone?
Well, even General Mattis has sort of admitted that there is no military solution to Syria and that there's no military solution to Afghanistan. So I think really it's the opposite. I think the burden should be on General Mattis and those who want to stay forever in every war theater around the world. The burden's on them to say, if there's no military solution, why are we still sending more military? Syria is an absolute mess. And the one lesson from Syria is that we need more diplomacy, and we actually need to have conversations with Russia. We've made it toxic for anybody to talk to Russia. But if you're not willing to talk to Russia, Russia's a big player in Syria, has been for decades, is not going anywhere. And if we don't talk to Russia, we're never going to find a peaceful solution to the Syria mess.
Well, I think a major issue here for people who oppose the president's announcement is not just the withdrawal of U.S. troops, but the way it's being done, unilaterally, with little consultation with experts about it.
Yeah,
but I want you to take a listen.
Here's the thing, Jake.
Well, just take a listen to what retired four-star general and the former top diplomat charged with countering ISIS, General John Allen, told me earlier this week, and I want to get your response.
Look, we all thought at one point that they would come home. But a precipitous departure of our troops could create a military disaster. And a global coalition will think twice about coming to help the United States if we need to in a great emergency, because they know we won't consult with them when the time comes.
You're always talking about the importance of alliances and the importance of diplomacy. Don't you think that the way this is being done without consultation with allies could lead to... Go ahead.
But here's the thing, Jake. You get these generals, and they'll say, oh, if we bring the troops home from Afghanistan, that's precipitous also. It's like we've been there 17 years. How does it become precipitous to leave after 17 years? The president said when we went into Syria very clearly, we're going to defeat ISIS. That was our goal. Then all these people who believe in forever war changed the goal. They changed the goalpost. They changed the mission. And they started saying, oh, we're going to stay there until Iran and Russia leave. It's like that means we're staying forever. You know, Iran's not leaving anytime soon unless you want to fight Iran. Do you want another war with Iran? American people are tired of war. So they want another war with Iran. Do they want us to have a war with Russia as well? I think we need to find a peaceful solution And it is complicated because it's going to involve the Turks, it's going to involve the Russians, the Iranians, the Iraqis, us, there's the Kurds. I mean, all of these forces are going to have to come together, and it isn't going to be easy to find peace. But leaving our troops there is sort of like a tripwire to a much larger war. The war has every danger every day of becoming an explosive, expansive war. And so I think the president is doing the best thing. He said we weren't going to be for nation building. We're not going to go create a nation out of that chaos of Syria or Afghanistan. We're going to take care of things we've got here at home. And I think actually the people are with him. Washington's against him, but this wouldn't be the first time that Washington doesn't represent the people very well.
Well, I hear what you're saying, but I guess one of the concerns also.
And Jake Tapper didn't really cross-examine him on those two dodges that I described before I showed the clip. The dodge on the fate of the Kurds and the dodge on the failure to consult. And he didn't really answer those questions, although he did go on to ask him about Trump saying that Obama founded ISIS by his precipitous withdrawal from Iraq, and why isn't Trump now refounding ISIS? And the thing to understand about ISIS is that they're this weird melding of these Islamic extremists with like the former Saddam Hussein army officers who like one of the big mistakes that George W. Bush and Donald Rumsfeld, etc., made when they invaded Iraq was that they put all the army officers and the army out of work instead of continuing to pay them, and so they became part of the resistance, part of the insurgency, and they made this weird alliance with Islamic extremists and Al-Qaeda, and they became ISIS when after the withdrawal of troops under Obama. And anyway, I didn't want to get all into that, but there's some of them still left, and that's why ISIS was so successful, I think, was because they had these people with military experience that, they took over tanks, and they were using tanks and taking territory. Now their territory is pretty much gone, but a lot of the people are still there and are like becoming insurgents and blending back into the population. And anyway, I'm going to talk about the way people who don't really believe in the intervention in the first place can oppose what Trump is doing when I show the Julian Castro clip after the next two clips. That's 3 clips from now, clip number 10. But clip number 8 and 9 are both from CBS's Face the Nation, and they're kind of disturbing because one is a fairly liberal Senator Chris Coons from Delaware opposing what Trump did in Syria, and then I'm going to show Representative Liz Cheney from Wyoming, the heir to the Cheney legacy. I think we're going to be seeing Liz Cheney more in the future, and I couldn't be less happy about it. But what's kind of disturbing about this is they both have kind of the same arguments. For some reason, Chris Coons forgets to say that he doesn't oppose, or that he doesn't support, and he's opposed to, these excessive use of troops and interventions in the Middle East. I don't know, maybe he does believe in it, but I certainly don't believe in it, and I wanted to hear that, and I don't want to hear a Democratic senator from Delaware sounding like Liz Cheney, the heir to the Cheney legacy, the new member of Congress from Wyoming. I don't want to hear her sounding like a Democrat. Although the one big difference is you'll see at the beginning of this clip, Chris Coons does mention that this is a gift to Putin and to the Ayatollah and to ISIS and everything. Liz Cheney, for some reason, never mentions Russia. But here's the Chris Coons clip that I'm going to juxtapose and contrast to the Liz Cheney clip, both from Face the Nation this morning over here.
Back to foreign policy. I know you heard a lot from Senator Paul there.
Yes, I did.
How do you respond to what he laid out, which is just the president is doing what he was elected to do? These are forever wars.
I could not disagree more. I think by abruptly withdrawing from Syria, President Trump is handing a great big Christmas gift to Vladimir Putin of Russia and to the Ayatollah Khamenei of Iran. And it's a pretty clear guidepost for me when there is a foreign policy decision that's cheered by Vladimir Putin and Rand Paul. That's a pretty good sign. It's a terrible idea. on a bipartisan basis, members of the Senate are pleading with President Trump to reconsider, to think that possibly his most senior generals and most experienced military leaders might be right. We shouldn't fumble the ball on the 5-yard line. The mission against ISIS, where the United States built a coalition of dozens of countries, is on the verge of winning, of completely shutting down ISIS in Syria. And for us to withdraw right now and abandon our Kurdish allies paves a highway for control of Syria for either Iran and Russia or Turkey, none of which is a good outcome, and profoundly disorients our allies who came into this fight alongside us and weren't consulted and weren't given enough of a heads up. I'm concerned about the security of Israel and what it does to Israel to have Iran strengthened on its immediate border. I'm concerned about the message this sends about how reliable an ally the United States is. And I'm concerned what it says about our ability to stick to a fight until it's won. The fight against ISIS is not won, and Brett McGurk's resignation and Secretary Jim Mattis's resignation and his dramatic letter of resignation make that very clear.
Now, I don't really disagree, like I said, with much of what Chris, or anything really, that Chris Coons said there. It's more what he didn't say, like that he didn't really mention the problems that we should have with Middle East interventions. Precipitously withdrawing from this one could be a problem, even if you opposed the intervention in the first place. And like I said, I'm going to show the Julian Castro clip in the clip after next. And he also mentioned the resignation of Brett McGurk. Every time I hear the name Brett McGurk, for some reason it makes me think of like he's a Dr. Seuss character. Was there a McGurk in this? I think there might have been a McGurk, but it was like every time I hear that, I think it's like Brett McGurk is not at work, and it should be some sort of Dr. Seuss thing. You can, I don't know, am I crazy? You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. But as I said before, I showed that Chris Coons clip. The thing that most disturbed me was most of what he said sounded exactly like what the Cheney heir, Liz Cheney, member of Congress from Wyoming, said later in the program, except, like I said, she never mentions Russia. But she says pretty much the same stuff in the 2-minute clip I will talk about with you from Face the Nation this morning after we watch together over here.
About the resignation of Defense Secretary Jim Mattis. His letter cited concern about the president's lack of respect for allies and lack of clarity regarding competitors like China and Russia. He seemed to invoke a lot of principles that traditionally Republicans do embrace. So do you see this as a call to action for the party that he says the president doesn't believe in these things?
Look, I am deeply, deeply concerned, and I oppose strongly the president's decision, apparently, to withdraw troops from Syria, the apparent decision that we're now going to be looking at withdrawing troops from Afghanistan. I think this president has done a lot of very good things in terms of beginning to rebuild our military, getting out of the Iranian nuclear agreement. But these two decisions would be disastrous. They would really, in many ways, hand the victories to our enemies, to Iran, to ISIS in Syria, the Taliban, al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. It's a very dangerous path to go down, and we shouldn't be going down it. We ought to make sure that we keep our troops there in order to prevent the establishment of safe havens from those groups that want to attack us. And
but foreign policy is an area that the president has some leeway on here. I mean, is there anything Congress can do other than implore the president to reconsider?
Well, I think that that's very important. I think that, you know, what we need to do is talk about the substance of these policies. And nobody is talking about, you know, the kinds of things that Senator Paul mentions. He seems to really be focused on blame America first and unburdened by facts. But if you look at what our troops are doing on the ground in Syria, for example, it's about 2,200 special operations forces providing air support, providing some artillery support. And that battle, that fight against ISIS isn't done. You quoted the numbers of ISIS fighters still there. We've seen how quickly ISIS can reconstitute. If we were to withdraw precipitously from Syria, if we were to withdraw from Afghanistan, leave a situation where our enemies could again establish safe havens, there's no question in my mind the president will regret that, and we'll be in a situation where we probably have to go back at far greater cost, both in terms of treasure, but also mostly American lives.
So you would argue that while the president's...
Now, in terms of the Syria intervention, I think there have been 4 of the 2,000 troops in Syria. There have been 4 American casualties, like 2 in combat and 2 not in combat. I saw that on some show in the last several days, and that compared to the number of Kurds who we are apparently abandoning, they've lost like 10,000 troops in the fight in Syria. And that's one of the things that's kind of disturbing, even if you don't really support the intervention. And like I said, there you see like the legacy to Dick Cheney, Lynn Cheney, representative, member of Congress from Wyoming, sounding disturbingly like Chris Coons in the previous clip, other than the mention of Russia by Chris Coons. And if you want to see a better way of opposing what Trump did in Syria, even if you oppose Middle East interventions, check out Julian Castro. And this is under a minute. He did a good interview. If you want to see the whole interview, click on the link to Meet the Press down in the video description. He's not my favorite candidate for president, but I do like his answer here, sort of trying to square that circle of opposing what Trump did that got his Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, to resign, but still kind of opposing the intervention. And this is kind of the last, well, the Bob Corker clip also talks about James Mattis and the Syria and policy and foreign policy, but that's sort of a transitional clip. This is the last fully Syria clip from Julian Castro this morning on Meet the Press that I will talk about with you after we watch together over here.
On policy, would you have troops in Syria right now if you were president?
Well, I think that many folks recognize that it was time for us to pull out of Syria. However, here's the thing. Once you're there, you have to make sure that you have a plan for your operations there and also for your withdrawal. So I'm not a big fan of the commitments America has made over these last 15 years, whether it was the Iraq War or this commitment. However, I do believe, and I agree with folks that say, that both for our own sake, for the sake of our troops, for the sake of our allies, once you're there, you have to actually have a solid plan for how you're going to withdraw. And what we saw this week is not the way that it should be done by a president.
You know, when if somebody decides to run for president.
So yeah, of all the Syria clips I showed, that's the one I most agree with, because there's so many. I'm almost on Rand Paul's side when it comes to being less interventionist. I think isolationist might be better description of Rand Paul's position. I don't consider myself an isolationist, but Rand Paul has this weird affinity for Russia I don't quite understand. If you watch that clip, I think it was pretty evident, but you can let me know what you think down in the comment section if you disagree. This next clip, I've been promising you for multiple times during the show. This is the very dark Bob Corker clip talking about especially what's going to happen in the next few months. Is he talking about the Mueller investigation? Is he talking about foreign policy? Because that's kind of where this starts, is with the resignation of James Mattis and how that is a really bad thing. One of the things that I have to criticize Jake Tapper for not asking about was what you saw in the very first clip I showed from AM Joy this morning, where Reid talked about how Bob Corker had said that the control of the budget process by a couple pundits, right-wing pundits, isn't that the definition of tyranny? That was never really addressed in this Jake Tapper interview. But Jake Tapper did ask Bob Corker about the resignation of James Mattis, and also about whether Trump is going to run again. And that's where this whole thing about the next 3 months being like a pivotal moment in the Trump presidency that seems really foreboding, but I can't figure out exactly what Bob Corker is talking about in this next clip. And there's a small edit in here just so I could get, it's almost 6 minutes long. I cut out about 40 seconds of Bob Corker saying something that I think he repeats pretty much later in the clip. So you'll see there's a little edit about 1 minute and 40 seconds into this 6-minute clip that I will talk about with you after we watch it together over here.
This is something you said more than a year ago about President Trump and what some people called the axis of grown-ups. Take a listen.
I think Secretary Tillerson, Secretary Mattis, and Chief of Staff Kelly are those people that help separate our country from chaos.
Tillerson was fired via Twitter. Mattis and Kelly are going to be leaving in the coming days and months. First of all, it's hard to imagine that the last year is the year without chaos, but should we expect even more chaos than we have already been experiencing, given the lack of these three men in the administration?
Yeah. So, look, I had a lot of respect for these three gentlemen and some who've come on since. I think what's happened really about 3 or 4 or 5 months ago, I noticed a real change. And I don't think that, I doubt there's anybody that really can, I think the president has felt that, look, I've got this now. Input from people like this is much less relevant to me. I've got this under control. So I think we're just in a whole different period now. When you've got Secretary Pompeo, John Bolton, General Mattis laying out all the problems that could occur with a precipitous decision like was tweeted out about Syria, and yet it still happens. I think you're at a place now where we're beyond that. And again, some devastating decisions.
What do you say to the person sitting at home who thinks, you know what, we've been in Afghanistan forever, we can't be in Syria forever? I'm sure President Trump came in, gave the generals some time, said, okay, you have a year, okay, you have another year, and then ultimately he's just like, we're never going to get out of these wars. These are forever wars, and we can't just fight them indefinitely. So even if I don't like the manner in which he's doing it, I support President Trump ending these foreign wars, ending these foreign entanglements. What do you say to those voters?
Well, we've got 28,000 troops in the DMZ, between South and North Korea. They're not in harm's way, but they're still there. In Syria, I mean, this was a very low-cost situation for us to continue to rout out Syria and to rout out ISIS, but also to keep in check what's happening there with Russia and Iran. And the fact is, we were coming to a close at some point. Obviously, we were going to leave Syria, but to leave it when you're within a couple of months of doing something that is very important in the fight against ISIS, and the president knows that, and we jerk the rug out from under 2 months in advance. That's hard to understand. As it relates to Afghanistan, no doubt. I mean, and we've made a lot of mistakes there. A lot of resources went from Afghanistan to Iraq in the early years, and I saw it happening on the ground visiting. So yes, we've been there a long, long time, but there are ways of leaving and ways of leaving. And again, this is precipitous. It appears to me that some changes are taking place as to the way we're looking at Afghanistan. And yes, we're negotiating with the very people that we went there to take out. So I understand the frustrations with Afghanistan. I do. I do not understand. I have no understanding of what we did, why we did what we did in Syria. It's just totally boggles any sane thinking that could take place. Boggles it. I don't understand it.
You were actually at the White House on Wednesday after the president made his announcement to withdraw from Syria. But before you could speak with the president, he canceled the meeting. What happened there?
I don't know. I think, he had no public events that day. I think the incoming, obviously, our conversation had evolved to be, it was going to be all about Syria, and I just don't think that was a topic on that day. I think he knows that he's made a mistake. I do. The president's tendencies are to dig in and double down, even if he knows he's done something that probably is incorrect. And so I don't think he wanted to talk about Syria that day, and so the meeting was called off, and that's what happened.
This week he told the New York Times about President Trump, quote, "I question whether he runs again. He's having difficulty handling the situation." Why do you think the president might not run again?
I look at just what's happening economically this week. I don't know. I mean, look, we'll see. This next quarter, I'm glad, Jake. I'm so privileged to have been able to serve in the Senate for 12 years, and I really am, and that's what I told the people of our state I would do, is serve for 2 terms. I do wish I was serving for 12 years and 3 months. I do think this next 3 months is going to be a very important 3 months for our country. I'm cheering the guys on that are there, but I think this next 3 months could well determine whether he decides to run again or not. I think it's going to be very important for our country that the United States Senate really dig in and make sure we don't make other colossal mistakes as it relates to foreign policy. But I think I think the stage is going to be set, and we'll see. Again, only he knows what he's going to do next, but we'll see. Very important 3 months coming up, though.
What does Bob Corker think is going to happen in the next 3 months? That seemed kind of dark and foreboding. That's what I have been promising. And what do you think what's going to happen? Is it he's talking about foreign policy? Is he talking about the Mueller investigation? And oh, by the way, sometimes I'm accused of over-introducing and over-analyzing the clips before I show them, but there was actually one thing I forgot to mention about that 6-minute clip that was really important. It's in the first minute, so if you're watching this as a recorded show, you can go back to the beginning of the clip and watch it over at least the first minute, and you'll see that Bob Corker also says this weird thing where he trails off, where he says, you know, like 3, 4, 5 months ago, there was this change in Trump, and I doubt anybody can... And then he, like, pauses and, like, doesn't finish the sentence, and it's like rein him in or control him, and that based on the rest of what he says, it's like he doesn't think there's anyone, because he's answering the whole thing about the grown-ups, and there aren't any more grown-ups, and I don't know, that is another kind of dark part of that clip if you go back and watch that first minute. But anyway, I want to get to my last few clips. The next 2 are both Mick Mulvaney, not on Fox News Sunday, but this is his interview with Jonathan Karl over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where he was cross-examined on a couple really important topics. The first one is about Trump's promise that Mexico was supposed to pay for this wall, and I think Mick Mulvaney's answers are pretty lame. He talks about the renegotiation of the NAFTA deal, and then says, well, you know, the Treasury, any money for the wall has to come out of the Treasury, even if Mexico does pay for it. But this is like, I don't know, I think lame is what I call it. You can let me know what you think about Mick Mulvaney's response to Trump's promises that Mexico is going to pay for the wall that he just shut down the government to get the American taxpayer to pay for, over in this clip.
I mean, I was out with the president throughout the presidential campaign. Mexico was going to pay for this wall from day one. Let me remind you what he said the day that he announced he was running for president.
I will build a great, great wall on our southern border, and I will have Mexico pay for that wall. Yeah. Mark my words.
Yeah. Mark his words. Now the president has forced a government shutdown because he's insisting that American taxpayers pay for that wall. What gives?
Sure. And if you ask the president, he'll point you immediately to something else that didn't get a lot of news in the last couple of weeks, which is this new U.S., Mexico, Canada agreement, the USMCA, which is so much better for us than the NAFTA deal, that American workers are going to do better, the government is going to do better, and you could make the argument that Mexico is paying for it in that fashion. Also,
but wait, he's asking for billions of dollars from American taxpayers right now. Hasn't he broken one of the central promises of his campaign?
Let me finish, because another story that I don't think you covered this week, and I don't know why no one did, is that Mexico has now agreed for the first time in history to keep asylum seekers, folks who are trying to get into the USA, on the Mexican side of the border. So these are folks in Mexican facilities maintained by Mexican officials. They're actually doing more for border security than many Democrats in Congress. So we really think we're in a good place in terms of getting the wall built and also getting Mexico to participate in our border security.
But none of that is Mexico paying for the wall. I mean, let's just be
But technically, you and I both know that it cannot work exactly like that. I can't spend any money at the Office of Management and Budget. The Department of Homeland Security can't actually spend money from Mexico. We have to get it from the Treasury.
I understand that. That's not the way it sounded during the campaign. So let me ask you about how we get out of this. There's been one...
Yeah, that's not the way it sounded during the campaign, and I pretty much pre-criticized that clip before I showed it, although I think that thing about Mexico keeping asylum seekers on the Mexican side of the border, that may be a violation of international law, the law of asylum. I haven't had a chance to research that, but I'm pretty sure that is another criticism I have of that clip. Then the final news clip, the final Mick Mulvaney clip, and then I have the Adam Schiff clip I promised also. But the final Mick Mulvaney clip I have is another good cross-examination from Jonathan Karl this morning, talking about Trump claiming he's going to fire the chair of the Federal Reserve, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, who has like an appointment that is immune from presidential tampering, just to make us an economy that has monetary policy not controlled by politics, or at least not directly controlled by politics, which is really important. And it shows that Trump doesn't even understand how our government's supposed to work, as often seems to be the case. And I think that Mick Mulvaney's answer is also kind of lame here. Jonathan Karl has to differentiate for him a tweet from Steve Mnuchin and a tweet from Donald Trump, which is pretty different, as I will discuss with you after we watch that clip together over here.
Booming. But you mentioned the Fed. It was just over a year ago that the president nominated Jerome Powell to lead the Fed. This is what he said at the time.
Based on his record, I am confident that Jay has the wisdom and leadership to guide our economy through any challenges that our great economy may face.
So the Fed is now led by his man, who has now raised interest rates again. And the New York Times is reporting that the president has told advisors that Powell, quote, will turn me into Hoover with these rate increases. Hoover, of course, presided over the Great Depression. Does the president think it's potentially that bad?
It is. Listen, it's not at all unusual for a president to complain about the actions of the Federal Reserve Chairman. I think Ronald Reagan is famous for it. Paul Volcker's book, I think, just came out a couple months ago, and he has a very specific passage where he was called into the Chief of Staff's office and told, let me make one thing perfectly clear, the president's telling you to lower rates. The tension between the president and an independent Fed is traditional as part of our system, so it shouldn't be surprising to anybody that the president is not happy that the Fed is raising rates and we think driving down the value of the stock.
But Hoover? I mean, is he worried we're on the precipice of something really bad?
The fundamentals, John, are what's going to drive this economy in the long run. They didn't have the same fundamentals back in the 1920s, so I recognize the president meant Hoover, but no one thinks we're going into a Great Depression.
Okay, so bottom line, though, does the president believe that he has the authority to fire the Fed chairman?
Oh, no. In fact, I think, and I'm sorry, we should have talked about this beforehand, I think he put out a tweet last night specifically saying that he now realizes he does not have the ability
We heard
to fire.
from Treasury Secretary Mnuchin saying that the president had told him that, but we haven't heard directly from the president.
I must have heard it. I did speak with the Treasury Secretary last night about a bunch of things, including the lapse in appropriations and the shutdown, and he did mention that to me. So.
Okay, I want to get to the change at
So that didn't really inspire confidence that Mick Mulvaney doesn't know the difference between Trump's tweets and Steve Mnuchin's tweets. And there's some late-breaking news. I heard that Steve Mnuchin was going to all the big bankers and checking on their liquidity, which is like the kind of thing you do when you are worried about a big crash like back in 2008. And there has been a huge decline in the stock market that, I mean, I don't have a lot of confidence after that answer on economics. And like I said before I showed the clip, it doesn't give me confidence of Trump's understanding of how our government works and how the Federal Reserve works. But you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And before I end the program, I want to show you one more news clip before the bonus Dash and Sandy clip. This is Representative Adam Schiff of California. I think he's from Burbank or somewhere around the Los Angeles area. He's the incoming chair of the House Intelligence Committee, and he's going to have lots of subpoena power on the Russia investigation. Supposedly he just turned over transcripts of the Roger Stone interviews with the House Intelligence Committee to Robert Mueller. That's something that he was asked about by Jake Tapper, but he wouldn't answer that. He said, I won't comment on what transcripts we've turned over. But he does comment on Jake Tapper's question about whether he'll subpoena the Mueller report if Trump tries to claim executive privilege, and he kind of hems and haws, but then he makes clear it's going to be made public except possibly for some redactions. And he also has this challenge to the Department of Justice based on this whole like bogus Hillary email scandal that the Republicans have been asking for information about. Well, those rules are still going to apply to the Mueller report, as you'll see in the final news clip, a little under, it's 89 seconds, that I will discuss with you after we watch it together from CNN's State of the Union this morning over here.
You know, the president's lawyers have said they might try to block Special Counsel Robert Mueller's report from becoming public by claiming executive privilege. If that happens, and it's blocked from the public seeing it, one course of action might be for Congress to subpoena the report to then make it public. You are about to have subpoena power. You're about to be the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. Is that something that you're prepared to do?
I'm prepared to make sure we do everything possible so that the public has the advantage of as much of the information as it can. And
that sounds like a yes.
That pretty much is a yes from my point of view, that we ought to make sure this report is public. Now, there may be parts of the report that have to be redacted because they involve classified information or they involve grand jury material. But here's the thing. For the last 2 years, I've been warning the Justice Department as they've been turning over tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of pages of investigative files in the Clinton email investigation, that whatever precedent they were going to set, they were going to have to live by, which means that when the Mueller investigation is over, they're not going to be in a position to say, we're not going to provide information to Congress about this investigation. So they've already decided that's the precedent they're going to live by. And at the end of the day, this case is just too important to keep from the American people what it's really about. And particularly when we've had questionable characters like Matt Whitaker at the top, there's all the greater need for transparency here.
One last quick question, if possible. Your committee voted.
And if you want to see that one last quick question and the rest of the interview of Adam Schiff, all the sources of my clips are down in the video description. That's the last of the clips I picked out for you. I hope you appreciate the clips I picked out. I appreciate those of you who support me with the thumbs up down there underneath the video, or a supportive comment. Of course, I appreciate the live viewers who give me supportive comments along the way, and also my live viewers who give the super chat contributions. I had a lot of great super chat contributions this week over here. You can see. Wow, $100 from My Earth. That's more than my ad revenue for a month from YouTube most of the time. So I really appreciate that. I appreciate the people who support me monthly on Patreon, the patrons on Patreon. There's a link down to that in the video description, or one-time contributors on PayPal. At the $5 level, you can get this hashtag LiberalViewer sticker. At the $10 level on either PayPal or Patreon, if you provide a shipping address, you'll get the sticker and the Constitution, ACLU Constitution, with a Know Your Rights with the police in the back. And for the Dash and Sandy fans out there, I promised a Dash and Sandy clip. This is a little about 2 hours ago. Because of some holiday cooking we're doing, we gave Sandy a marrow bone, which she took over into her crate where her food and water dish are, but it didn't stop Dash from stealing some of Sandy's water. Shows how sweet and harmless Sandy is and how bold Dash is in this 19-second clip here. So Dash steals water while Sandy chews on her marrow bone. Just another day in Dash and Sandy world. I hope all of you are having a good time in your world and your whatever holidays you may be celebrating. I hope you're having some good time off and a good weekend. And I will be back with the final Liberal Viewer Sunday live clip roundup of the year next Sunday. I'm trying to put together a poll question about 2019. It's like, what cliche or common phrase will best describe 2019? So far, the phrases I've come up with are, you can see the light at the end of the tunnel, is one. It's always darkest before the dawn is two. We're on a highway to hell is three. So if you have suggestions, I'm going to do one of those like polls where you like click in the corner and answer the poll question. Those are like the three choices about what phrase will best describe 2019. If you have suggestions about other like cliches or phrases that I could put in the poll, you can let me know down in the comment section. I appreciate all of you who've been watching, and until I have a reason to give you another edited Bruce video like the Turn the Supreme Court up to 11 video that I'm still working on, or maybe this Trump answers question, what if Fox News ran America video I've thought of making. Those are all possibilities in the next several weeks. Until I have a chance to make one of those videos, I will be back next Sunday and every Sunday for the foreseeable future. And until then, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.